Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Mr. Martinez, you may continue.
Ma'am, I want you to take a look at exhibit number 242.001 and go to the entry dated Thursday, September 13th, 2007. Read it. When you're done reading it, you let me know. Are you done reading it?
Yes, I am.
Why don't you just turn it the other way with the binding up and then down. Well, that's all right. Anyway, with regard to that, that is something that you read as part of your investigation into this case, right?
Correct.
And it's something that you remember reading, right?
Yes.
And it is something that you used in reaching whatever assessment you reached in this particular case, right?
Yes.
And one of the things that that talks about is a trip to Havasupai, right?
Correct.
And it references a number of people going with them to Havasupai, correct?
Correct.
It's the defendant who goes, one of the people, right?
Yes.
One of the other people is Travis Alexander, correct?
Yes.
Somebody by the name of Daniel Freeman also goes, correct?
Yes.
And Desiree Freeman, right?
Yes.
And there's some writing there, and this is written by the defendant, correct?
Correct.
That's your understanding of it, right?
Yes.
And this is part of the corroboration that you used in reaching your assessment, right?
Yes.
In other words, this is the collateral source that you found to be, for lack of a better term, accurate, so that you could then compare it to what the defendant was saying and to what other people were saying, right?
I didn't consider this a collateral source.
So it's a primary source then, right?
It's a source from the defendant.
So you consider that to be a primary source then, right?
No, I look at collaterals as just other people other than the defendant. Not that it's better or worse, but that
Right.
it's
And
direct.
in this particular entry, the defendant bemoans the fact that things did not start out very well on the trip to Havasupai, correct?
Correct.
And she indicated there were some tense moments there at the beginning, right?
Yes.
And then she also indicated that Mr. Alexander apologized to you, correct?
Correct.
And she said that, according to her, that he was 90% responsible for the argument, right?
Yes.
One
That
of
he
the other
said he
people-
was.
Pardon? What did
She
say?
says that he said he was 90%.
Right.
Yeah.
Not the gist of it. He's saying that he's 90% responsible for the argument, right?
Correct.
And did you consider talking to Daniel Freeman about that incident to see if it actually corresponded to what's actually in that book?
I read the Freeman statements, but
So the answer is no, you did not talk to him, correct?
I did not talk to him.
And that being the case, you are left with that rendition there as something that, in your view, since it's a primary source, is something that's truthful, correct?
It's something that I took to be truthful, yes.
Right. And if it's truthful, though, would it cause you to reevaluate how you viewed all of these entries in the journal if it were found that perhaps that entry was not accurate? Would it cause you any problems?
Is this a hypothetical?
Let's assume that it's a reality and that whatever's out there indicates that what's in that journal is not accurate. It's not, you took it to be truthful, now find out that perhaps that's not what happened. Would that cause you any problems?
Sure.
And it would cause you problems with regard to all the other entries, right?
Depending on what I had collaboration
Sure.
to defend.
But if you only had the journal entries and one of them turns out to be untrue, it could then be, if you will, a cancer that is spread throughout all of these journals, right?
Objection is to mischaracterizing this journal entry as untrue, making it as a statement rather than a hypothetical.
Overruled. You may answer the
Go ahead.
question.
If I'm assuming this is untrue,
Right.
that it would make me look much more carefully at the other journal entries and look to the other collaborative sources.
And wouldn't it cast doubt then on whatever statements the defendant gave to you if they corroborated that, right?
If they corroborated,
What's in that journal right now?
I would look at all my corroborating data, Mr. Martinez.
Did you talk to the defendant about that particular trip to have a suit by?
Yes,
And she told you that what's in there is correct, right?
correct.
So if, for example, in this case, Daniel Freeman came in and testified and indicated something different than that, that would be problematic, wouldn't it?
Objection is characterized as Mr. Freeman's testimony.
Overruled. Let me answer the question.
Is this hypothetical? Because I have no evidence of this.
Right, you were not here when he testified. But
No.
assume hypothetically that he said something different.
If you propose a hypothetical
Well,
that I have no evidence of, you want me to say what I
Right.
think about that hypothetical I have no
Sure.
evidence of.
Assuming that that person came in and testified to that in this courtroom, hypothetically, all right?
Yes,
Under oath, all right?
yes.
What if Mr. Freeman came in and testified that the fight was actually started by him? I want you to assume that.
Objection is characterized as Mr. Freeman's testimony.
Overruled.
Assume that.
I
you do
don't,
that?
Miss Arias does not say that Mr. Alexander started the fight. They just that they had a fight.
I understand that. Assume that it was Mr. Freeman that started the fight, correct? Can you assume that for me?
I can.
And assume that there was an argument because of something that Mr. Freeman did, correct? Can you assume that for me?
Okay, you're asking me to make a lot of assumptions based
Yes.
on information I don't have.
Absolutely, that's what I'm doing. Can you do that for me?
I can go along with that.
And assume those two facts, just those two facts. Those aren't written in that September 13th, 2000 entry, is it? 2007 entry, are they?
No.
And if they were true, wouldn't that make that entry incomplete?
No, not necessarily. I mean, it's
You
not a
wouldn't-
detailed entry. It's
Well,
just a,
Aren't you providing an excuse, and aren't you siding with the defendant again, saying, no, it wouldn't make any difference what this other information that you gave me?
no, I'm not saying that.
Sustained.
Aren't you not looking at both sides equally when you say to me, well, it wouldn't matter, in this case, those two facts that you've added?
What I'm saying is that I try to look at the big picture.
I understand you want to look at the big picture, but...
And that this particular
Ma'am, I want you to look
entry,
at the small picture, September 13th of 2007.
Judge, may you finish?
No. Next question.
Look just at that entry. You don't want to talk about any other entry, please.
all right?
With regard to that entry, if you found that it was incomplete and didn't include the reason for the fight, wouldn't that be important to note?
It doesn't include the reason for the fight.
I know it doesn't, but wouldn't that indicate that it's incomplete because it doesn't indicate the reason for the fight?
It's just a journal entry.
And that journal entry means nothing to you, does it? Or it does?
A standalone journal entry doesn't
Yes.
mean as much to me as when I look at the big picture.
I'm just talking about this one, and I understand what you're saying.
It's incomplete, I will agree with that. There's not any description of the fight or anything.
So if it's incomplete with regard to that, and you're relying on it, it would appear that you're relying on something that's incomplete, correct?
I'm not sure that you're looking at how I rely on things.
Well, you read it, right?
Yes, I did.
You put it into your brain, this brain that you use to go through this continuum of aggression, right? You put that information, after reading it, assimilated it into your brain, and then made a decision based on this continuum of aggression that you talked about, right? That's what it's part of what you did with regard to that, right?
I told you the way I used the continuum. So I'm not putting it into the continuum. I'm putting it into the big
All right, so you took this,
barrel of information that I've gotten.
so you took this entry and you put it into this big barrel of information that you have, right?
Correct.
What if that's a cancerous, if you will, or invalid entry that you put in with the other information that you have there? That won't affect your view or opinion in this case?
Objection assumes facts, not evidence.
Overruled.
Anything can affect.
All right, specifically here in this case. we both agree, or you agree, that the reason for the fight is not there, correct?
Correct.
And so that's an omission on the writer's part, correct? To put that in there. For whatever reason, the writer didn't put it in, right?
Correct.
You don't know the reason why the writer didn't put it in, correct?
No, I don't.
It could be that it would reflect badly on the writer, right?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
Well, with regard to this case, assume that Mr. Freeman came in and testified that the reason that the fight started was that because the defendant was being unreasonable as to the items that she was going to take on the trip. I want you to assume that.
Objection is characterized as Mr. Freeman's testimony.
Overruled.
Assume that. Will you do that?
So once again, you have me assuming
Yes.
facts I have no knowledge of.
Absolutely.
And no evidence for.
Not no evidence, you don't have any information of it. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Correct? You weren't here when Mr. Freeman testified, were you?
No, I was not.
So assume, for purposes of looking at that journal entry, that the reason the fight started was because the defendant was being unreasonable as to the items she was going to carry on this trek. Assume that.
Objection. Mischaracterizing the testimony of Mr. Freeman.
Overruled. This is a hypothetical.
Assume that.
Judge, I would ask that it be placed as a hypothetical and not that Mr. Freeman came in and said those things.
Sustained.
Assume the hypothetical that I just gave you, please.
Okay.
All right? Assuming that. Wouldn't that cast doubt on the validity of that entry?
Yes.
And additionally, also assume, ma'am, that with regard to this fight, whatever it was, that this fight then escalated at some point and they went somewhere else, the two of them. Assume that. Can you do that? A different part of the house. Assume that, hypothetically speaking.
All right.
It doesn't talk about them going to another part of the house in that entry, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't talk about what happened at the other part of the house in that entry, does it?
No.
And it doesn't talk about what was said between the two people, if anything was said, when they were in that room, does it?
And this is all hypothetical?
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically, you're giving me a lot of things that I don't have any reason to believe, but I will go with a hypothetical if that's what you want.
Well, does it say anything there about anything happening in a bathroom?
No.
Does it say anything in that entry about anybody cursing at anybody else?
No, it does not.
Does it say anything else about how that argument was resolved, if it was resolved at all in the bathroom?
No.
So, you don't have any information. That entry is an example of something that is very incomplete, right?
Yes.
And so, did you talk to the defendant about this?
I did talk to the defendant about it, but I'm not recalling all the details. I'm recalling that there was, I'm recalling some of the things that the Freeman said and some of the things that Ms. Arias said, but I would need to look at the Freeman's statements about this particular.
That's not my question. Isn't it true that you talked to the defendant about this? That was my question, yes.
Yes, I talked to the defendant.
And you discussed this particular entry with her, right?
Yes.
And even though you discussed this with her, and even though you had the Freeman statement in front of you, whatever that statement may be, you still found there was nothing invalid about this particular entry. In other words, it's something that you found, according to your gatekeeping abilities, you found that one to be true, correct?
I found it to be one piece of information that I didn't put that in the, if you're looking at it and saying, did I put that in the mix with domestic violence? No, I didn't.
I'm not asking you that, if you put it into the mix with domestic violence. Are you clear about that?
No, I wasn't clear about that.